Playoff baseball is back at Citi Field tonight, and the New York Mets just announced their roster for this upcoming series. And guess what? Starling Marte is there. We'll be discussing that on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, I wanted to hop on here to do a YouTube exclusive edition of Locked On Mets, just to break down the fact that we have the roster for this wildcard series. And the biggest news is Starling Marte is on it, and maybe pair with that, it's that Tyler Naquin is not. So really fascinating the decisions that were made here. The Mets are going with 14 position players, 12 pitchers. They left off Carlos Carrasco, Taijuan Walker, and Trevor Williams. So a lot of the longer relief options are not on there. Don't expect that to hold up going into the next series if the Mets were to advance, because once you get to a 5-game set, you're going to need that depth. But because it's a 3-game series, the Mets are skewing heavy on position players, 14 position players with their 12 pitchers. The pitchers, I don't think there's really anything too interesting to discuss once you get past the fact that Carrasco and Walker are not going to be there. Trevor Williams was burned when he threw 79 pitches in the last game of the season. So we knew he likely wasn't going to be on the roster. We thought that one of those two guys might not be in Carrasco and in Walker, and they decided to go without either of them. So the pitchers are as follows. Your 3 starters: Max Scherzer, Jacob deGrom, Chris Bassett. You got Tyler McGill and David Peterson, who can theoretically give you some length. Peterson for sure. McGill, we don't really know how stretched out he is. It was interesting to see that he really got the last spot in this bullpen, in my opinion. But you go from there, and it's Seth Lugo, Trevor May, Adam Ottavino, Joel Rodriguez, Drew Smith, Edwin Diaz. So the pitchers are pretty much what you thought, without obviously Carrasco or Walker. But the interesting thing is Starling Marte is here and Tyler Naquin is not. Naquin, I mean, you're looking at a roster that includes Terrence Gore, Darin Ruf. Naquin could not scratch this roster. I guess it's indicative of his play as of late. Maybe it's the fact that the Padres have a ton of lefties in that bullpen. So if you're thinking about how you're going to deploy your guys throughout the game, if you're not going to start Tyler Naquin in any of these games, if Starling Marte is going to be in the starting lineup potentially here, and you're going to roll, or if it's going to be Louis Guillorme in the starting lineup with Jeff McNeil in right field, regardless of how you line it up, basically the thought process here could be they would rather have the extra righty than Tyler Naquin, which means Darin Ruf is on the roster, as is Francisco Alvarez. They're carrying 3 catchers. Alvarez could be starting against Blake Snell. I think that what the Mets are going with here, assuming Alvarez is the priority when it comes to getting at bats over Darin Ruf, is they're just looking at the upside of Alvarez, and maybe they also like the ability to have a third catcher. Maybe that is the difference between Alvarez and Mark Vientos. We talked about him, talked about that a bunch 2 shows ago where I had Aram Layton on, and both of us felt like Mark Vientos was giving better at bats than Francisco Alvarez. Obviously, Alvarez in his final game did a lot, hit a home run and a double, but the pitching that he saw, I just wasn't sure if that was going to really be enough to push him onto the roster. But I think they just believe the upside is so great with Alvarez. And again, he at least gives you something positionally where if you want to pinch hit, for James McCann, if McCann's starting a game that Bassett is pitching and you want to pinch hit there, you have a little extra coverage with the third catcher on your roster. So that is the way it has gone here. And to give you the full position players, so I don't think I read them off yet: Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Eduardo Escobar, Jeff McNeil, Louis Guillorme, and Daniel Vogelback. Those would be your infielders, with McNeil obviously playing that swing role. The catchers, the 3 I already said: Nido, Alvarez, McCann. Outfielders: Brandon Nimmo, Starling Marte, Mark Canha, Terrence Gore. Darin Ruf. I think we knew that Terrence Gore had a good shot at making all these rosters, particularly this one with that needing as much pitching. But Darin Ruf is interesting. The fact that they included him on here, the fact that it's not Mark Vientos, they're trusting the veteran, and I'll be fascinated to see who gets that start against Blake Snell at DH. Will they go just with the vet and trust that Darin Ruf can give you good at bats, which is hard to trust considering his tenure in a Mets uniform, or are they going to go with the upside playing Alvarez? A lot to be determined here, but it's going to be a great series. I am so thrilled that we're watching playoff baseball. To think that the last time that I got to watch the Mets on a playoff game, it was a one-game playoff. Noah Syndergaard versus Madison Bumgarner. I was freshly 21 years old. Here I am at 27. It's been 6 years since we've seen this team in the postseason. So I'm thrilled for it. And I do want to let you all know over on YouTube, and also if you're a podcast listener, I will have bonus shows after every single playoff game as long as the Mets are in the playoffs. So later tonight, I'll be hopping back on to record a breakdown of this game. I'm excited for it. Yu Darvish versus Max Scherzer. Blackout all the jerseys at Citi Field, going with that 1999 2000s feel with those black jerseys, where there has been some magic in them this year with a combined no-hitter as really the shining moment. Nothing will be better, though, than a playoff victory in those black jerseys as the Mets look to take a big edge in a 3-game series against the Padres. Anyway, that's going to be all for this special edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in Major League Baseball. Follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.